Freakmo's top 7 skincare tips. Number 1. Wash your face twice a day using a gentle cleanser. Tip number 2. Apply moisturizer twice a day to help repair your skin barrier and maintain a healthy moisture balance for soft, supple skin. Tip number 3. Wear sun protection, including sunscreen, sunglasses, and a hat to prevent the premature aging and sagging caused by sun damage. Tip number 4. Don't smoke, as this damages and prematurely ages your skin. Tip 5. A healthy diet and lifestyle improves your skin's health too. Tip 6, remember to stay hydrated. And finally, tip number 7, I recommend you get enough sleep, at least 6 hours a night. This is what I do to take care of my skin. Next, I'll show you how I skin and clean human faces for long-term preservation and trophy mounting. Just kidding, that's on my other channel. Next, I'll show you how I create these silicone faces. To get the ultimate realism in the skin in terms of movement, feel, touch, look, you gotta go with silicone. If you have a silicone negative of your face already because you've made a silicone face cast, or you've poured silicone onto your plaster face cast to make a new face cast, or core like I did recently in my resin one for my ripped off face, then you will use this as your face mold. If you don't have a silicone negative of your face, you can make one from a plaster life cast. If you don't have any sort of life cast, you can make one out of alginate and plaster, but I do highly recommend having someone who is experienced and knows what they're doing to help you with this, as there are inherent risks in coating your face in alginate, so hire an experienced makeup artist or a life caster if you need to. So essentially you need to pour silicone over your face cast with clay walls built up around it so the silicone doesn't just like flood your table. I built up 3 layers and the last 2 layers were pre-thickened silicone. My face cast in this video is outed with some clay because I'm making a resin core for a mold for a different makeup, but you can definitely just use your normal shaped life cast. Next you need to create a shell to give this mold a structure because silicone will just flop around and it will distort its shape without it. I am using a rigid polyurethane resin, so it's like a hard plastic basically, but you can use things like plaster bandages as well. The resin has the benefit of being really durable and stable for long-term use of the mold. I thickened my resin with polyfiber, adding enough so that it was more like a paste to easily spread it on top of the silicone. Once this had cured, I took out the plaster face and we have a mold. I put a thin layer of Vaseline over the inside of the silicone mold and then wiped off any excess with a tissue, and I sprayed a release spray in there as well so that our silicone that we're pouring in to make our face doesn't bond with the silicone that the mold is made from. Next, I weighed out my silicone, so it's 1 part Platsil Gel 10 Part A, 1 part Platsil Gel 10 B, and 2 parts Smith's Prosthetic Deadener. This will create a very soft, floppy, detached face. If you add less deadener, it will give you a firmer mask. So if you're new to silicone, you have to be careful to use separate spatulas for each part, as cross-contaminating your containers will ruin it. I added a couple of drops of light flesh tone silicone pigment and a drop of white silicone pigment, and this gives it its skin tone. And I also added some flocking fibers in red and blue, which give it the appearance of veins and capillaries under the skin. But you don't have to add flocking, it's just an extra step towards super realism. I mix everything together and pour it into my silicone mold, and there are 2 things you can do here. You can either slush it around on the surface for like 15 minutes to create a thin skin over all of it, or you can put your face cast back in, and this will create a shape on the back of the silicone face, so it will align perfectly back on top of your face, over your nose, lips, eyes, etc. You just need to make sure you put something, like I'm putting in sculpting tools here, into the side of the mold so that it can't close fully, and this will create a gap of maybe like 1 centimeter or less where the silicone will sit and cure between those 2 sides to form that final shape of the severed face. Now, if the life cast you're putting in is plaster, it will need to be sealed with something like crystal clear or shellac and then sprayed with a release too. I'm using a resin face core here, which does release a little bit easier. Once that's cured, I take the mold apart to see if the thickness of the silicone is what I want, and then I powder it on both sides to remove it from the mold. Even unpainted, it looks pretty strange. I had a lot of fun on Snapchat that day. Then I use a pair of small scissors to cut off any of the edges that I didn't like, and I cut open the eyelids, the mouth, and the nostrils. Now to paint silicone, you need to also use silicone. Anything else just kind of comes off and it won't completely stick to it. So I'm using the same silicone I painted it with, just for simplicity, so Platsil Gel 10, and you don't need deadener for this. I mix it in with silicone pigments that I want to use. Usually it's a custom mixed color because I just have the primary colors and white and black. Then you add a chemical called Naptha, or shellite in Australia, which is a lighter fluid, and this will thin the silicone for painting thin, transparent coats. It is pretty bad for you to breathe in or have on your skin, so I wear gloves and a respirator and eye protection while doing this. I start by putting a very small amount of Platsil Gel 10 A and B. I put a small amount of a blue vein tone that I mixed so that it would stay quite transparent, and I put a small amount of Naptha in. You really only need to work in very small amounts for this. I paint on the lips, up around the nostrils, and then I add a light coating of vein blue around the face, stippling it on with my fan brush. I pat off any excess colour with a paper towel and a small amount of Naptha on it. I found that keeping the paint and layers really thin and transparent really helped with realism. I blow dry that for a couple of minutes to help the silicone cure, and then once it's cured, it won't come off at all while I'm painting on all the other layers, so that's pretty nice. So every color is going to be the same. It's going to be some silicone pigment, some Platsil Gel 10 A and B, and some Naptha. So this time I mixed up a blush color in there. Again, I put it on the lips first, and then I stippled it around the rest of the face, removing any excess color. You could definitely stop here. For one of my faces, I stopped here and it was fine. But for this face in this video, I did add a bit more coloring. After the blush was cured, I did a mix of light flesh tone, trying to keep it transparent again, and this went over everywhere. Once that had cured, I put more blush pink into the lips, up around the eyelids, and around the nose and cheeks, any areas that would usually be rosier or thinner, more transparent skin. Next, I mixed up a transparent tan color and stippled that over everywhere, and then removed any excess and let it cure. Lastly, I mixed up a clear coat of silicone and painted that over everything. Once that last layer had cured, I powdered it and recut open the eyes and mouth if the silicone had stuck it back together, and I thinned out any parts of the mask that I thought were too thick, so like around the back of the eyes mostly. I mixed up another small batch of silicone, naphtha, and pigment. This time it was a muscly pink tone, and I put this color around anywhere that would have been cut, so like inside the eyelids, nostrils, lips, around the edges of the face. And once that was cured, I did the same thing but with a blood red silicone that I made. Having the blood color in silicone is really nice because it's not going to rub off or transfer onto anything. To add eyelashes, I used individual lashes to the top and bottom eyelid. I used a thickened Prosade cream called Bondo along the inside of the eyelids to attach the eyelashes. I used both short and medium lashes. And once I was happy with the eyelash placement and density, I put another small layer of blood red silicone just over the base inside the eyelids to hide where they were glued in. To add the brows, I initially drew them in with alcohol paints to get an idea of the shape. I also put some electrical tape around the outside of that so that I had a boundary of where to hair punch the hair in. I used a hair punching needle, which you can find pretty cheaply at makeup stores like Friends Beauty, and I used some old hair extension hair to do this. So human hair is fine to use, it's just not as realistic as other animal hairs you can get for hair punching, and that's because human hair is quite straight and it doesn't taper. If you can get a hair that is tapered and slightly curled, it's going to look way more like actual eyebrow hair. But in a pinch, this will do. To punch hair, you have to be aware of the direction that the needle is going into the silicone, as this determines the hair direction afterwards. I had to practice punching eyebrows a few times on spare silicone pieces before I tried it on this final face. You want to hold your hair at a 90-degree angle to your needle so that the needle can grab onto all the hairs as it's being pushed down into the silicone skin. A good angle for eyebrows is kind of out towards the side of the face rather than straight up and down. Once the hair was all punched in, I wet it and stuck it down to the silicone so the hair would dry sitting flatly rather than poking straight up. Once the hair was dry, I cut it down with some small scissors and I plucked out any hairs that had wandered too far out of the bounds, and I used a small amount of Skin Illustrator on a mascara wand to darken the brow hair slightly. I also applied some hair wax to try and keep the hair flatter against the skin as well. I ended up pulling out one of the eyebrows that I wasn't happy with because the hair was just too straight up and down, and then I repunched that. Lastly, I punctured through the silicone mask to make some holes for the elastic bands to tie through. I ended up making some around the temples and some around the mouth, as the silicone was pretty heavy and I found it needed 2 straps to hold it tight across my face. Then you have your very own creepy, highly realistic, very soft and movable fake skin mask. Go forth and be creepy.
Come play with us.
Thanks for watching. You can check out my Taylor Swift ripped off face video from Halloween here. And if you liked this video, it would be awesome if you subscribed. See you guys soon.